Okay, great. My name is Glenn McKinlay. I'm from New Zealand, but I've had the privilege to live and work in Palau for the last 7 years. Now, Palau is a tiny little country out in the Pacific Ocean. So we want to explore some of the linkages and what we've found there. So it's a Pacific island. It is clearly located within the Flyway boundaries on the eastern side of the Flyway. It's possibly in the middle for some of the flight routes. So there's a lot of satellite tracks that go past. It's 7 degrees north of the equator, about 1,000 kilometers east of the southern Philippines, similar to northern Indonesia and New Guinea, 2,000 kilometers south to Australia, 3,000 kilometers north to Japan. A small Pacific Island country, only independent since 1994, only 17,000 people in the entire country. It's not in the partnership for the Flyway. Why not? The partnership documents list the various countries that are eligible to join, and Palau is not there. We suspect it's sort of an accidental obstacle. The Flyway discussions, the precursors to the Flyway, started back in 1993, which is before Palau was actually a country. But also Palau was known to have some Flyway species, but they were thought to be in very low numbers. That all changed with the identification of a significant site in 2015. There's an odd kind of conundrum there. It means Palau cannot actually meet its UN Convention on Migratory Species Convention obligations, because it's actually meant to join the partnership. Anyway, hopefully that'll get resolved in time. This slide shows just how different Palau is from most of the East Asia-Australasia Flyway. The Pacific Ocean is very, very big and mostly completely empty. So how do you get to a distant oceanic island? If you're a human, what you do is you invent some incredible maritime technology, learn about navigation and weather, and make a dangerous one-way journey, and then you stay out there for 4,200 years on your own and develop a unique culture where you're really dependent on your environment and you know a huge amount about it. If you're a shorebird, you just fly there twice a year, and you've done that probably a long time further than the people that have been there. These are red knots photographed flying through Palau's waters last year. Great navigators. Palau is a global leader in marine science and conservation resource management, famous for migratory fish, but not well known for migratory birds. Just an example of what they've done, the Belau National Marine Sanctuary protects all of Palau's international, or all of Palau's economic zone. 80% of that has no fishing whatsoever. The rest is an exclusive domestic fishing zone. World-leading conservation work in other spheres. The coastal marine environment is totally owned by the local communities. It's highly valued for food resources and for tourism, and as a source of local. So in terms of shorebirds, habitat is really limited on most of Palau coast. It's coral reef and mangroves with a short mudflat, small, not very wide mudflat. That doesn't support many shorebirds. Most of the monitoring up to 2015 was done on this main island of Bubble Dub, but that missed this key small site down in Palau state, which was largely unknown. This site is called the Northern Palau Sandflats, or Palau Lakes. Its IBA potential was first identified in 2013, but confirmed in 2015. And my sort of voluntary task really over the last 6 years has been to survey that. It's a remote site, difficult access. Here's how I got out there by kayak, carrying all the water, food and everything for 3-day campouts. Don't miss the tide because you're stuck there for an extra 4 hours. But it's well worth it because it's really Palau shorebirds. Bit of a timeline of what has been done. The initial discovery back in 2013, we actually had a black-faced spoonbill, which raised a bit of surprise. Then the first 2 years was really trying to figure out what species was present, work out how to actually get out there and survey and develop a methodology, plus confirming the important bird area criteria were exceeded. Then the 2016 to 19, really focusing on building up the data, 60 site visits, regular surveys, try and cover all species and seasons, and also initiate some lead flag searches. Then on the conservation front, there's been 2 conservation campaigns by the local organisations, the Conservation Society and the Belau National Museum. I'll cover those a bit more at the end of the report. Logistics and survey methodology, first working out when and how to visit. I made a big mistake. I used the spring tides, the high tides, to get in there to the island where I could camp and carry all the gear by kayak. It was easy to do that at high tide, but I found after 18 months, in fact, the neap tides gave much better count. Why was this? The first reason was because the birds stayed in place right through the full high tide cycle, so I had a lot more time to actually observe and count them. Secondly, the grey-tailed tattlers, which are one of the important species, could only be counted in full at dawn immediately after a high tide that had occurred at night. On all other high tides, they went to the mangroves and weren't countable. I found that 2 to 3 day campouts were better than single day visits and used the maximum count for each species over the several days. That seemed to be much more accurate. Methodology, the photo counts were better than visual counts, gave 25 to 40% higher numbers, and also allowed better species identification and allowed more field time to be used for searching for leg flags. The only downside was lots and lots of hours of computer work once I was back home. It was nearly as much fun as the field work. A summary of the key data. This is the maximum species count for the site over those years. 28 flyway species in total. 18 of those are regular wintering species, 17 are regular stopover species, 33 leg flags found so far, all flyway priority species. 56,000 observations there in total so far. If we drill into the more important species, the grey-tailed tattler, Asiatic wimbrel and ruddy turnstone all exceed the 1% of flyway population threshold every year. The red-necked integrated sandplover exceed the stopover threshold. Leicester sandplover probably also does, but the identification's a challenge. What's interesting is, are they the Stegmani subspecies? And Pacific golden plovers had one stopover threshold exceeded. That's sort of a one-off. We don't really understand that very well. Other important species, bar-tailed goblet, great knot, and far eastern curlew, all in small numbers every visit, and a few other species in smaller numbers. Flyway connections, leg flag records, Kamchatka in Russia, Japan, Taiwan, and the Chongming is in China is the most significant one so far. Hello to the people out there. Thanks for all the black and white tags. And only one from Australia so far, which is a bit of a curiosity in my mind. It'd be interesting to get people's thoughts on why that might be. What is the role of the Palau site in the flyway? Do I know? No, but I do know so far that it's rather complicated. It is definitely a wintering site. It's one of the most northern on the eastern side of the flyway. It's a stopover site for sure, and there's no sites nearby for the birds if they miss that site. Is it an emergency stopover in case of typhoon? Maybe. Is there partial migration from non-breeding breeders? Possibly. Is it a molt site? We know wing molt occurs. We don't really understand the role of it. Some key features of the site, it's isolated. It's really distant from other stops on the migration route, probably 1,000 kilometres to another significant site. Small, the entire site's only about 5 kilometres across. So to find that big ocean, marvels of navigation. Fine silt, that's actually a really rare environment on small oceanic islands. And in the neap tides, there's actually quite large feeding zones above water, even on that low high tide, which is a little bit unusual in that geographic environment. It's an exceptionally pristine and unmodified shorebird habitat, very, very little human impact. A few people go there to catch crabs and fish, but otherwise virtually no one ever visits. What that intact ecology means is we've got some interesting links. Stingrays and shorebirds, what do they have to do with each other? Well, all those holes on that surface are what left over from stingrays coming up at high tide to dig for shellfish. At low tide, those holes all hold water. That means there's water along the surface of the sand flats, vast areas, and it never really dries out. Stingrays also knock telescopes over. Flyway connections, grey-tailed tattlers. Australian tracking data does show repeated short stopovers in Micronesia, a little bit to the east of Palau, but it's quite likely that there are some in Palau also. What might that imply about turnover and connectivity? Really interesting questions. I don't know the answer. Annual patterns, we're getting the peaks on both northward and southward migration seem to be more or less similar. Late March, early April, the top peak, and September, October. The non-breeding season, May, June, July, about 25 to 30% of the total migration season counts. Breeding season, the data's a little bit weak there still, but probably 50 to 60% of the migration season high counts. Looking at the individual species, some variation, but the broad pattern of peaks on northward and southward migration, but birds through all seasons seems to be pretty steady. So moving on to the awareness raising and conservation. Once we identified the importance of the site, there was a campaign by the local Palau Conservation Society, excellent work on the public campaigns and submissions to protect the site. There was a major resort development proposed there, unfortunately. There's a video you can see online, the Wings Ambassador of Palau. I'd recommend it. Right now, this year and next, the Belau National Museum is conducting a campaign called the Migratory Birds of Palau. They are really working with the local community and the Palau conservation frameworks, the Ministry of Education, the Palauan community-based organisations, outreach and media campaigns, educational programs with local schools, site visits and monitoring. The goal there is to encourage formal protection of the site within Palau's conservation frameworks. And under Palau's ownership laws, that means that the Palau state government has to designate the site as a protected area. Hopefully that will happen. We can't say when, but the local community is certainly very much involved. They're doing excellent work on the publicity. They've done 4 site visits in the last 2 months. Each one of those has been written up for the local newspaper. The community site visits have been extremely popular. A lot of people have heard about these shorebirds that they didn't know about in Palau, but they're really relishing the chance to get down there and see for themselves and participate. The education side of it's really going well as far as I understand too. Palauan people really like to do things together as a large group, and that really ties in with the visits that they're doing. There's also really interesting potential to merge science and the local knowledge and skills. We're talking about hunter-naturalist skills here, and I just love this photo that I got a couple of weeks back. These ladies somehow knew that they could walk out there and just kind of sit down and monitor the shorebirds. Here they were searching for leg flags. I never managed to do that without kind of causing a bit of disruption, so I didn't go that close. They somehow just know how to do it. Going forward, what's needed? Formal protection. Bring the site into Palau's protected area network. That needs that Palau state government decision. Further forward, there's a need to develop and fund local capacity for monitoring and science, but also how to integrate the shorebirds into the conservation management frameworks that Palau uses. And then the international links. What's the potential for Palau to join and cooperate with the Flyway partnership? The site meets the Flyway site network criteria. Can it become part of the site network? Are there sister site or other partnerships that could be arranged? And on the science side, what questions need to be answered and how can Palau effectively contribute? And just a final word on Palauan people, culture and shorebirds. Although the focus is very much on fish and food resources, there's a very special story in Palauan culture. And we heard from the plenary speaker last night about the importance of shorebirds and stories. There's this wonderful story of a bird called the Dalarock. Now, the Palauan people were out there by themselves for all those millennia, but the Dalarock was a mythical bird that flew in with the Palau money. The money beads are a small bead worn around the neck of every woman. They represent wealth, prosperity, and status. And those birds were brought by this mythical bird, the Dalarock. Now, that Dalarock is so important, it's featured prominently in motifs on traditional meeting houses, which was where the leadership all would make their decisions, and on the Capitol building that was built just 15 years ago. There are pictures of the Dalarock all around the building. The Dalarock is in fact the Far Eastern curlew. That bird is now nearly extinct in Palau. It'd be an absolute tragedy if that bird was to go extinct in Palau. So Palau and the East Asia-Australasia Flyway, how can Palau contribute? Messalong, thank you very much to so many people in Palau and also people from outside. I look forward to any questions and discussion that anyone wants to have.